On a November night in 1931, a white gangster put his hands on a woman he never should have touched, a mistake he would be forced to document with his own hand, a confession pennied hours before he vanished from the face of the earth. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's a masterclass in psychological warfare from the heart of the Harlem underworld, a brutal lesson written in ink and blood. Harlem, New York, in the early 1930s was a universe unto itself. It was the epicenter of a cultural renaissance, where jazz poured from basement speakeasies and poetry challenged a nation's conscience. But beneath the glittering surface of the Cotton Club and the intellectual fervor of the salons, another economy thrived, one built on hope and desperation, the numbers game. This was an illegal lottery, a daily ritual where ordinary people could bet pennies on a three-digit number, dreaming of a life-changing payout. It was a grassroots operation, run by and for the community. And at the pinnacle of this shadow economy stood a woman of formidable will and sharp intellect, Stephanie St. Clair. Known throughout the streets as Madame Queen, St. Clair was a self-made force. Immigrating from Martinique, she built her policy bank from nothing, employing locals, offering loans, and commanding a loyalty that was both earned and absolute. She wasn't just a gangster, she was an institution. And by her side was her most trusted lieutenant, a man whose calm exterior hid a core of tempered steel, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. He was her strategist, her enforcer, and her most dedicated protector. Theirs was a partnership of mutual ambition and profound respect, a fortress they had built brick by brick in a world that gave them nothing. But their fortress had drawn the gaze of a man who believed everything could be taken. Arthur Flegenheimer, known to the world by the brutal moniker Dutch Schultz. Schultz was a bootlegger, a brawler, and a rising kingpin whose empire was built on sheer, unadulterated violence. With prohibition's end on the horizon, he was casting about for his next revenue stream. His eyes settled on Harlem. He saw the numbers game not as a community enterprise, but as low-hanging fruit, ripe for the plucking by a superior, white-led organization. He didn't see businessmen and women, he saw prey. The tension was a slow-burning fuse. Schultz had begun his campaign of intimidation, sending messengers with offers to buy out the independent bankers. The offers were in reality ultimatums. Surrender your operation for a pittance or face the consequences. Most bankers, terrified of Schultz's savage reputation, capitulated, but not Madame Queen. She refused, publicly and defiantly. She organized the remaining independents, urging them to stand firm. To Schultz, this wasn't just business, it was a personal insult. A black woman was defying him, and in his world that could not stand. This brings us to the night of November 7, 1931. The location was as symbolic as it was physical, the Oak Door. This wasn't a Harlem jazz club, it was a bastion of Manhattan's white elite, a restaurant so exclusive it had only recently, and reluctantly, begun admitting a handful of wealthy black patrons. For Stephanie St. Clair, dining here was a statement. It was a declaration that she belonged in any room in the city. She was celebrating a successful week with Bumpy and a few close associates, discussing expansion plans that would, inevitably, cross into territory Schultz viewed as his own. They felt a measure of safety in this gilded cage. The logic was sound. Schultz was a beast, but even beasts understood the rules of certain arenas. He wouldn't risk a violent spectacle here, in front of judges, socialites, and powerful white diners who would not tolerate their dinners being disrupted by gangland squabbles. It was a calculation based on a decorum that Schultz did not possess. The atmosphere was tense but civilized. Crystal glasses clinked. Then, Bumpy Johnson excused himself to visit the men's room. It was a routine, human moment, but in the predatory calculus of the underworld, it was an opportunity. With her primary shield gone, the wolf entered the fold. At approximately 8:47 p.m., Dutch Schultz pushed through the doors of the Oak Door. He wasn't skulking, he entered with the swagger of a man who owned the very air in the room. He was flanked by four hard-eyed men. Among them was Patrick "Patty" O'Brien, Schultz's personal bodyguard. O'Brien was a particular kind of dangerous, a large, brawling Irishman known for his viciousness and his open, seething racial hatred. He was the embodiment of Schultz's contempt for the people whose kingdom he sought to steal. Schultz's gaze swept the room, a hunter scanning a meadow. It landed on St. Clair's table and stuck. A slow, cold smile spread across his face. The room's chatter began to dim as he made his deliberate way toward her. You could feel the oxygen being siphoned away. He stopped, looming over her, violating the space of her table. His voice, when it came, was loud, meant to humiliate, to perform her subjugation for the entire restaurant. "Well, look what we have here," he announced, a theatrical sneer in his tone. Madame Queen herself, trying to use the same forks as respectable people. Then he deployed his weapon of choice, a vicious, snarling racial slur. The word hung in the stunned silence like a physical blow. White patrons froze, faces a mixture of shock and acute discomfort. They looked down at their plates, suddenly fascinated by their consommé. To intervene was to step into a world of knives and gunmetal they wanted no part of. St. Clair's associates moved to stand, a reflex of defense, but Schultz's men closed ranks, hands moving meaningfully inside their jackets. The threat was silent and absolute. Through it all, Stephanie St. Clair remained preternaturally still. She did not flinch. She looked up at Schultz, and her voice was like chipped ice, quiet, clear, and cutting. "Mr. Schultz, you are interrupting a private dinner. Your business, whatever you imagine it to be, is not welcome here. I suggest you turn around and leave." Her composure was a fuel poured directly on the fire of his rage. Her suggestion, her calm assumption of authority, was an affront he could not absorb. "You suggest," he spat, his voice dropping into a guttural growl, "you don't suggest a damn thing to me. You're a visitor here, in this restaurant, in this business. Harlem's numbers, that's my business now. Every slip, every runner, every dollar. It all belongs to me. You're just a fancy-dressed woman who needs to be reminded of her place." Then he made the confrontation tangible. From inside his overcoat, he drew a heavy revolver. He didn't wave it. He placed it on the starched white tablecloth with a deliberate thud. He spun it slowly, a macabre roulette wheel, letting the barrel point at St. Clair, then at her terrified associates. Then back to her. "This piece," he said conversationally, as if discussing the wine, "has ended more arguments than I can remember. Look at it. Look how easy." He picked it up, his finger sliding against the trigger guard, and pointed it directly at her face from a distance of 3 feet. "See how nobody moves? See how this fancy room won't save you? So let's make this simple. Do I take your business today, or do I just take it? Because believe me, lady, taking is what I do best." What happened next defied every expectation in the room, most of all Schultz's. Stephanie St. Clair did not cower, she did not beg. Her hand moved to her beaded purse, a motion as graceful as reaching for a compact. From it, she produced a small nickel-plated .32 caliber pistol. She aimed it, unwavering, at the center of Dutch Schultz's chest. The gasp from the surrounding tables was collective. "Mr. Schultz," she said, her voice still terrifyingly level, "you seem to believe your skin is a shield. It is not. Bullets do not check for color before they tear through a man. Now, I will repeat myself only once. Put your gun down and get out." For 5 eternal seconds, the universe contracted to that single point. 2 figures, frozen in a lethal tableau, guns aimed across a table setting. The only sound was the frantic heartbeat of 60 paralyzed onlookers. It was a stalemate forged in pure will. It was broken by arrogance and brute force. Patty O'Brien, seeing his boss momentarily checked, acted. He took 2 swift steps, his bulk moving with surprising speed. His arm swung in a wide, powerful arc. The backhand struck Stephanie St. Clair across the cheek with a sound like a cracking whip. Her head snapped sideways. The small pistol flew from her grasp, skittering across the polished floor. O'Brien stood over her, a conqueror. "That's how you handle an uppity one," he gloated, loud enough for the room. St. Clair held her face, blood already welling from a split lip. The humiliation was as violent as the blow. Schultz threw his head back and laughed, a genuine, hearty sound of delight. "You see, Stephanie, this is what I mean about knowing you're." The laugh died in his throat. It was replaced by a sensation more primal than fear. The cold, unmistakable, circular pressure of a gun barrel pressed firmly against the base of his skull. It was pressed so hard it indented the skin. A voice, low, calm, and devoid of all humanity, spoke from directly behind him. "If your dog touches her again, The last thing you'll hear is the click before your brains paint this wall. Drop the gun on the table. Do it now." Bumpy Johnson had returned. The calculus of power in the room inverted instantly. Johnson had materialized from the shadows of the restaurant's rear, a specter of vengeance. His .45 automatic was now the most important object in the building. Schultz's men were statues, their hands frozen inches from their own weapons, their eyes wide with the impossible math of the moment. Could they kill Johnson before Johnson's reflex sent a round through their boss's brainstem? The answer, written in Johnson's steady posture, was a definitive no. "Bumpy Johnson," Schultz said, forcing a veneer of calm. "You gonna murder me in front of all these fine citizens? You ready to ride the lightning for me?" Johnson's reply was a rasp of ice. "I'd sit in the chair for 1 minute to watch your head turn to mist. Now tell the man who hit her to back away, slowly, or I simplify this problem for everyone." Schultz, the pressure at his skull unwavering, had no play. "Patty," he commanded, the word tight, "step away from her, now." O'Brien, confused and seething, took 2 steps back, his hands rising slightly. Johnson began dictating the new terms of existence, his voice never rising. "You're going to leave. You will never approach Madame St. Clair again. You will never speak her name. You will never even look in her direction. If you do, I will find you, and I will kill you. This is not a threat, Dutch. It is a natural fact, like gravity." After a final, tense exchange of stares that promised future fire, Schultz collected his gun. He led his men in a slow, humiliating retreat from the dining room. The door swung shut behind them. Only then did the paralyzed room erupt into a cacophony of shock and frantic whispers. Johnson was already at St. Clair's side, his gun vanished. He produced a handkerchief, gently dabbing the blood from her lip. His eyes, which had been so cold moments before, were filled with a simmering fury. She looked up at him, the pain in her face now giving way to something harder, more resolute. "Find him, Bumpy," she whispered, her voice thick but unwavering. "The one who put his hands on me, Patty O'Brien. I want him to understand. I want him to know." Johnson nodded once, a deep, final gesture. He will write a letter to Schultz explaining why it was the last thing he'll ever do. You have my word. The hunt began that night. Bumpy Johnson's network, a web of loyalists, informants, and street ghosts, was activated. The word went out. Johnson was looking for Patty O'Brien, and he was paying for information. The sum offered, $500, was a fortune, more than a working man might see in a year. It was a signal of serious intent that reverberated through the overlapping worlds of Harlem and the Irish mob enclaves of Hell's Kitchen. For 7 days, Johnson's men canvassed bars, rooming houses, and social clubs. They leaned on police contacts, paid off janitors, and watched brothels. They were methodical, relentless. The underworld held its breath, watching this chess game between the rising prince of Harlem and the established white king. The breakthrough came on November 14th. An informant, motivated by money or old grievance, delivered a perfect piece of intelligence. O'Brien would be at a specific Hell's Kitchen tavern that night, meeting with collectors to settle accounts. Johnson didn't just send a crew, he orchestrated a takedown. 6 men were positioned in the shadows of the narrow street. They waited until O'Brien emerged after midnight, drunk and unsteady from a long evening of boasting and whiskey. As he fumbled for his car keys on a dim, deserted block, the shadows came to life. It was a clinical operation. A hand clamped over his mouth, arms pinned his own, and he was bundled into the back of a waiting panel van in under 15 seconds. The vehicle melted into the New York night, heading north toward a nondescript warehouse in the Bronx. O'Brien was dragged into a cold, concrete-walled basement. The space was empty save for a single bulb hanging from a wire, a small wooden table, and 2 chairs. Seated at one chair was Bumpy Johnson. On the table lay a pen, a bottle of ink, and several sheets of plain paper. O'Brien's bravado returned, fueled by alcohol and fear. He shouted about Schultz, about the war this would start, about what would happen to Johnson and his whole ratty crew. He even spat the same racial epithets, trying to reclaim his sense of dominance. Johnson let him rant. He simply waited, his hands steepled, until O'Brien's voice ran dry, replaced by the ragged sound of his own breathing in the dank room. Then Johnson spoke. His voice was a quiet, educational tone, as if explaining a simple truth to a slow child. "Patty O'Brien, you're going to write a letter. You will write it in your own hand, so your boss recognizes it. You will tell him that striking Madame Stephanie St. Clair was the most significant error of your life. You will write that you have come to understand that black women are entitled to the same respect as any other human being. You will apologize for the embarrassment and trouble you have brought upon his organization, and you will wish him a long and successful life. Then you will sign your full name and today's date." O'Brien laughed, a shaky, defiant sound. "Go to hell, I ain't writing nothing. Dutch will burn Harlem down for this." Johnson gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. One of the men standing in the shadows stepped forward and drove a fist deep into O'Brien's stomach. The air exploded from his lungs, and he collapsed to his knees, retching. Johnson leaned forward, his face entering the pool of light. "You have a choice, Patty. You can write the letter, or we can break the fingers on your right hand, one at a time, starting with the pinky. We'll move to the left hand if we have to. Eventually, you'll hold the pen with your teeth if you're still feeling stubborn. Do you understand the choice?" The lesson was visceral. The defiance in O'Brien's eyes shattered, replaced by the raw, animal understanding of his predicament. He was broken, he nodded. His hands were untied. For the next 30 minutes, under the gaze of implacable men, Patrick O'Brien wrote. His hand shook violently, smearing ink, the letters childish and sprawling. He confessed. He apologized. He wished Schultz well. It was a pathetic document, a testament to utter defeat. He signed it, Patrick O'Brien, November 15, 1931. Johnson took the paper, examined it carefully, and nodded. He looked at O'Brien, who was now sobbing quietly. "This letter will be delivered to Dutch Schultz. He will read your confession. He will read your goodbye. He will look for you. He will offer rewards. He will pressure the police. But he will never find you, Patty, because after tonight you cease to exist. You become a ghost. And your ghost and this letter will carry my message to every man who works for Schultz and every man who thinks like you. Touch someone under my protection and you don't just die, you disappear." Your story ends with a question mark. What transpired after Johnson left that basement is unrecorded. No official report, no death certificate, no grave. Patty O'Brien was never seen again. 2 days later, a messenger boy delivered a sealed envelope to the office of Dutch Schultz in the Bronx. Schultz's secretary recognized the clumsy handwriting immediately. Schultz opened it alone. Witnesses from his organization would later say his face turned the color of chalk as he read. The letter was a masterpiece of forced contrition. "Hitting Madame St. Clair was the biggest mistake of my life. I see now that all women deserve respect. I apologize for the trouble I've caused you. I wish you well. Goodbye." Schultz made frantic calls. He learned O'Brien's wife had filed a missing persons report. The message wasn't just clear, it was elegant and brutal. Bumpy Johnson hadn't simply executed a rival. He had staged a psychological operation. He had forced his victim to dismantle his own legacy, to author a script that absolved his killer of specific motive while branding the victim's action as unforgivable. The body was evidence, but a letter like this. It was a ghost that would haunt every conversation, a chill that would run down the spine of every enforcer Schultz sent into Harlem. The numbers war would still explode, a brutal conflict spanning years, but Stephanie St. Clair survived its bloodiest chapters. Many historians argue that her survival was secured in that Bronx warehouse, not just by a killing, but by a message. Johnson had introduced a new, terrifying variable into Schultz's calculus of violence. It was no longer just about profit and loss. It was about a specific, personal, and utterly merciless retribution that left no trophy for the police, only a story for the underworld. The legend of the forced confession letter grew, passed down in barbershops and pool halls long after Schultz himself was gunned down in 1935. It cemented Bumpy Johnson's reputation as a strategic thinker, a man whose vengeance was not merely hot blood, but cold, deliberate, and unforgettable. It taught a lesson that echoes in the annals of true crime. Some mistakes are so profound, you don't just pay for them with your life. You are made to write the receipt.